My Brother's Keeper, a Reverend Margot Quade cozy mystery novella, Book 4. Written by S.E. Biglow. Narrated by Stephanie Dillard. 1. The huff of the bus's hydraulic brakes roused Margot from her doze. She opened her eyes and stared out the bus's window at the snowy mounds covering every available inch of landscape outside of Belvedere's bed and breakfast in Collingwood, Vermont. The small town was just a short trip from Port Marie. While Margot loved her hometown, after the year she'd had, she needed a break. The little B&B would be the perfect getaway for New Year's Eve. Chances were she'd spend it in the company of strangers. Not that she minded, although, now that she was here, a part of her questioned why she hadn't accepted Sam's offer to spend the holiday together, like they'd done in their youth. "This is where you needed to go, right, ma'am?" The driver called out to her when she had stayed rooted to the sidewalk in front of the quaint 3-story house with rosy pink shutters and cream-colored siding. "Yes, thank you," she answered with a forced smile. Then she closed the distance to the tiny front porch and shouldered her way through the front door into a cozy foyer. Heat blasted from old-fashioned radiators, and she let the warmth seep into her skin, beating back the chill from her brief time outside. Even after having time to acclimate to New England weather, she was convinced her core temperature was stuck in the Middle East. As she let the heat revive her, Margot took a moment to take in her surroundings. The house was a typical New England home with wood paneling and tasteful prints of town squares and ocean views leading up the first set of stairs. Directly ahead of her sat a small desk, and off to her left she heard the commotion of people around a dinner table. She left her bag by the front desk and poked her head into the dining room. 6 people sat around a heavy oak table. "Oh, you must be Margot," an older woman with gray hair announced, her voice carrying across the room, loud enough to stop the side conversations. "Yes, ma'am," Margot answered. "I'm sorry to interrupt dinner. The bus was behind schedule." "Nonsense! Come right in." The woman turned her attention to a teenage girl staring transfixed at her phone. "Valerie, put that thing down and go get another place setting." Valerie let out a sigh, but set the phone down and walked past Margot toward what Margot assumed was the kitchen. The woman rounded the table and extended a hand to Margot. "Caroline Belvedere, proprietor." Margot shook Caroline's hand. "It's very nice to meet you." Caroline glanced over her shoulder at the other diners. "You can take the seat beside Kalina," she said, pointing to a red-headed woman, possibly in her early 30s. Margot took the seat offered to her as Valerie returned with a bowl and utensils. As she served herself some soup and bread, Margot took stock of her fellow boarders. Kalina eyed the man beside her. She noted they both wore wedding rings, and it was a likely assumption that they were here together. Despite that connection, Margot caught the averted glances and the tight lines around both of their mouths. She turned her attention to the pair on her right. The young man sported a military buzz cut, and she spotted dog tags around his neck. He offered her his hand. "Private Dennis Parker." "Margot Quade, former Army chaplain." Margot felt the weight of her own dog tags and cross against her chest. They were a comforting reminder of her calling. The young woman on Dennis's other side sat hunched over her bowl of soup, the sleeves of her turtleneck sweater pulled down well over her hands. Margot thought she saw the faint yellowish green of a healing bruise on her left cheekbone. Her blonde hair fell over one shoulder. The table dropped into an uneasy silence, everyone turning their attention back to the meal. "So, Dennis, what branch of the military did you say you were in?" Caroline said, breaking the uncomfortable silence at the table. "Marines, ma'am. I deploy in a few days," he answered in a deep bass tone. "And did I hear you say that you were in the Army, Margot?" Caroline prodded. "That's right. I've been home for about a year now," Margot answered after a mouthful of soup. "Well, thank you both so much for your service," Caroline said with a bright smile. Nana, they hate when people say that. It's like hypocritical, Valerie said loudly. Margot said nothing to Valerie's comment, but smiled to herself. She knew some soldiers who felt that way. However, if her host wanted to thank her for what she'd done for her country, she'd accept the statement of gratitude. Dennis stayed silent, too. His face turned stony as he focused on the food in front of him. Out of the corner of her eye, Margot noticed Kalina lean in and whisper something to her husband. He waved her off, and she let out an audible huff of annoyance. The woman beside Dennis remained quiet throughout the whole meal. "I don't think I caught your name," Margot said, hoping to pull the young woman into the conversation. Her gaze flickered toward Margot. "Cecilia," she mumbled. "What brings you to Collingwood?" Margot asked. "Just visiting," Cecilia mumbled into her napkin. The conversation died down again as everyone focused on finishing their meals. Maybe it was her pastoral training, but Margot sensed Cecilia needed someone to lean on and open up to. Unfortunately, as soon as she finished eating, Cecilia had quickly retreated upstairs. "Why don't I show you to your room so you can get settled?" Caroline said, appearing at Margot's side. "Sure, thank you." Margot retrieved her bag. She waited while Caroline checked her in on a slender tablet and then followed the woman up to the second floor. "Now, we've got a half bath on this floor, though if you need a shower, you'll have to go up to the third floor," Caroline explained. Margot nodded mutely as she stepped into a quaint little bedroom with a queen-sized bed and accent pillows. It looked quite inviting, with what she guessed was a handmade quilt laid squarely on top of it. "Does everyone eat meals together?" Margot turned to face Caroline, who stood in the doorway. "At least breakfast and lunch. Food is usually ready in the morning by about 7. "Great. Sorry again for arriving so late," Margot repeated. "Don't you worry about it, dear. Honestly, it was nice to break up the tension a bit." Caroline took a step into Margot's room and glanced out into the hallway. Margot recognized the gesture for what it was. Her host was about to share whatever gossip she had on the other guests, whether Margot wanted to hear it or not. "Now, normally I don't like to talk about people," Caroline said, "but this is not how I expected to spend my holiday. Kalina and Chris, the married couple across the hall from you, have spent the entire time bickering. And poor Cecilia, well, she jumps at her own shadow." "Is she here alone?" Margot bit her tongue the moment the words were out of her mouth. "No, she arrived with Dennis, but they're in 2 separate rooms up on the 3rd floor. I can't put my finger on it, but there's something off about the pair of them." "I'm sure it's nothing," Margot said. Still, she couldn't help wondering if perhaps Cecilia needed a kind shoulder to lean on, a stranger who wouldn't judge her. "If you don't mind, I'm going to just take a quick peek upstairs and get the lay of the land," Margot fibbed. "Of course!" Caroline retreated to the 1st floor, and Margot ascended to the top level of the house. She spotted 3 doors on the hall. The first revealed the bathroom. The second was empty, with a military bag sitting neatly at the foot of the bed. That left the room with its door mostly closed. She approached, knocked twice, and waited. "Go away," Cecilia called through the doorway. "Is everything okay? You seem upset," Margot replied. "I'm fine. Please just leave me alone." Margot wanted to push, but she knew better. Whatever was weighing on the girl wouldn't be lifted, especially if Margot tried to force the issue. "Well, if you need someone to talk to, I'm just downstairs 1 level." Margot returned to her own room, offering up a tiny prayer that everything would look brighter in the morning. After all, it would be a brand new year. As Margot settled in across from the window, she could see distant flashes of color as the locals let off some early fireworks displays to celebrate the occasion. Margot wasn't sure what woke her at first. She sat up, wide awake in the unfamiliar room, and looked around. Something had roused her, but what? She checked her phone and saw it was 6:10 in the morning. Climbing out of bed, she pulled on the jeans and sweater she'd worn the day before and crept into the hallway. The door across the hall remained closed, and she moved with quiet steps to the landing leading both up to the top floor and down to the first floor. Her gut told her to head downstairs, and she did her best to move quietly on the worn wood. It creaked and betrayed her presence as she reached the bottom. She passed the dining room, the table empty but ready for the next meal, and entered the kitchen. A pot of coffee sat on the percolator, and by the tiny drops marring the countertop, someone had already taken some. She poured herself a cup after rummaging through 2 cupboards to find a mug. Standing with the mug in hand, she gazed out the window above the sink. She caught a glimpse of messy blonde hair disappearing out of view. Then the back door opened, and Cecilia entered, looking dazed. Her shoes were caked in snow, and she wore no coat, only a bulky sweatshirt, with her hands pulled inside the sleeves. Her entire frame shook from the frigid temperature. "What were you doing outside without a coat?" Margot prompted, guiding the girl to stand away from the partially open door. "I'm fine," Cecilia answered, teeth chattering together. "You're not fine, you're freezing. Wait here, I'll find a blanket," Margot said, using her army-trained authoritative tone. Cecilia flinched, but stayed put while Margot went in search of a blanket. She pulled open every door on the first floor until she found a linen closet with some shawls. She grabbed 2 and returned to the kitchen, where she draped them over Cecilia's shoulders. "Do you drink coffee?" Margot asked. "I can make you some." Cecilia shook her head. "No, I'm just going to go take a hot shower." Margot eyed the girl as she pulled the shawls tighter around her torso and traipsed up the stairs. Margot grabbed a 3rd shawl from the closet and stepped onto the front porch. The early morning air was crisp, but not nearly as cold as she had expected. The night had been windy, blowing snowdrifts into new formations. It wasn't enough to obscure the dark smudge of fabric on the ground at the base of the front porch. She set her mug of coffee down on the railing and descended to the front walk. Dread filled the pit of her stomach. Please, Lord, don't let this be another test of strength. After uncovering the truth to Port Marie's pain-filled past, she wasn't sure she was willing or even able to take on the pain of another town. Still, she bent down in the snow and felt the slope of what could be a shoulder. Her mouth went dry, and her fingers trembled in the cold morning air. Did she really want to know what lay beneath the snow? The slushy, biting feeling of snow on her bare hand sent shivers down Margot's spine as she continued to clear it away. She didn't pay attention to the change in skin color as her hands dug deeper into the pile, her gaze zeroing in on the fabric of a shirt and bare arm. She bit back a cry of surprise, her mind already working to fill her head with gruesome images of what she was inches away from discovering. Despite knowing better, she kept digging until she uncovered the frostbitten and very dead body of Dennis Parker. 2. As Margot gazed down at the partially uncovered body, she wondered how long he'd been out there. Going against her better judgment, she continued to dig Dennis free, revealing a bullet wound in his chest. My God. Was a gunshot the thing that had roused her from sleep? The sound of the front door slamming against the front of the house drew Margot's attention from the soldier's lifeless body. Kalina appeared on the porch, wrapped in a heavy coat, her red curls a mess in the early morning light. "What's going on?" she asked. "It's Dennis. He's been shot," Margot answered. "What? Are you sure?" Kalina was off the porch and by Margot's side in seconds. She crouched down to study the young man's prone form, her hands covering her mouth in shock. This can't be happening. I know this must be unsettling, but we need to call the police, Margot said. Kalina shook her head and stood up. Not really. I've seen more dead bodies than you'd think. I sort of have a knack for happening upon them. It drives Chris nuts. Well, at least it used to, anyway. Once I'm in it, I can't let go until I know what's happened. Had Margot found a kindred spirit? I'm the same way, Margot murmured. After a beat, she nudged the other woman's shoulder. We need to call the police and report this. My phone is back in my room. I'll get it and tell Chris what's happened. I'll stay with Dennis, Margot said, and stood at attention. She waited until Kalina was inside before she saluted the dead soldier. I'm so sorry. I hope you rest in peace, she whispered. She glanced down at her ungloved hands, realizing that in her effort to uncover Dennis, she'd gotten some of his blood on her. She shivered and fought the urge to wipe them clean. It felt like an eternity before Kalina finally reappeared, Chris trailing her in a t-shirt and unbuttoned jacket. He had a phone pressed to his ear. This is Captain Christian Harper, Ellsworth Police. I'm at Belvedere B&B. We need police and the coroner. One of the guests is dead. Kalina slipped past her husband and rejoined Margot by the body. Chris ended the call and closed the distance, so all three of them stood over Dennis's partially uncovered body. Police are on the way, Chris said. Looking at Margot, he added, Mind telling me what you were doing out here? You don't have to answer that. He's not in charge, Kalina quipped. It's okay, Margot said. I woke up. I wasn't really sure what roused me at first, although now I think it might have been a gunshot. I came downstairs, stepped outside, and noticed some fabric in the snow. I uncovered him enough to determine his identity. Kalina went inside and got you so we could alert the proper authorities. Don't give me that look, Kalina said to her husband. I didn't say a word, Cal. Just stay out of the way, okay? He rubbed his arms and turned to the front of the house. I'm going back inside to let Mrs. Belvedere know what's going on, so she doesn't have a heart attack when uniforms show up. I don't mean to pry, but is everything okay between you two? Margot asked Kalina, once Chris was out of earshot. The tension she'd observed at dinner the night before still remained. We're fine, the other woman answered with a sigh. We just needed to get away from home for a few days. My sister and nephew are watching the shop I own, and our daughter is with them. We haven't really had a lot of time with just the two of us since she was born. I think he's just frustrated that we can't even go on vacation without death finding us. Understandable, Margot replied, her ears perking up at the sound of wailing sirens in the distance growing closer. You didn't hear the sound of gunshots? It didn't wake you? Kalina shook her head. I'm a pretty heavy sleeper. She turned away from Dennis's body and asked, Do you think he's been out here long? I'm no expert. The cold weather probably won't make it easy to determine things for the police either. Still, if what I heard was right, he couldn't have been out here for not much more than an hour or two, Margot noted. I can't imagine who would want to hurt him. I heard him and Cecilia arguing last night after dinner, Kalina said in a hushed tone. I tried to talk to her, but she told me to leave. So I did, Margot said. After a pause, she added, She was acting strange this morning. She'd been outside in the backyard with no coat or anything. She was nearly frozen when she came back inside. You left that part out of what you told Chris. Margot brushed strands of hair out of her face. Honestly, I didn't think it was relevant. But now that you mention her arguing with Dennis, do you know what sort of relationship they had? I mean, they showed up together, but I think they were staying in separate rooms. Margot was about to mention the fading bruises she'd spotted on the girl's wrists, but decided to keep quiet. She didn't want to accuse Dennis of something he might not have done, or agitate Cecilia, as it was most certainly a touchy subject. "Sounds like we should have a chat with her," Kalina said. 3. Margot didn't want to admit the mystery intrigued her. She didn't have time to respond to Kalina before Caroline came barreling out the front door in a bathrobe and slippers. The sirens keened louder, and a squad car bearing the words "Collingwood Police" on the side arrived. Kalina's husband, Chris, marched out behind Caroline, and the group of 4 met the uniformed officer. "I'm Officer Kevin Johns. Which one of you called about a dead body?" "I did. He's over here," Chris said. Caroline followed Chris's movements with her gaze, keeping a safe distance. The moment she laid eyes on Dennis, she let out a high-pitched scream and staggered backward. Margot and Kalina moved in unison to catch her before she fell into the snow. Some of the blood from Margot's hands smeared on the back of Caroline's bathrobe. "He's really dead?" Caroline whimpered. "I'm afraid so. Come on, let's get you back inside. I'm sure Officer Johns can talk to us in there," Kalina said softly. Margot glanced over her shoulder as the other officer accompanying Officer Johns positioned himself by the body, unrolling police tape and tying it to a nearby phone pole. His dark complexion stood out in stark contrast to the wintry scene around him. She and Kalina settled Caroline at the dining room table. 15 years of owning this place, and I've never had a boarder die," Caroline moaned. "It's going to be okay," Margot assured her, despite not knowing if things would work out, though she had faith. "What's going on? Why are there cops here?" Valerie asked, appearing at the bottom of the stairs in an extra-large t-shirt and pajama pants. "Mr. Parker is dead," her grandmother replied. "What? No way." Valerie peered out the front door. "What happened?" "We aren't sure," Margot replied, before too much misinformation could spread around the tiny house. Valerie backed away from the door as heavy footsteps clomped up the porch. Chris led Officer Johns into the dining room. "Is this everyone?" Officer Johns asked. "No, there's one other boarder. I saw her before I went outside. She was taking a shower," Margot answered. "Where's the bathroom?" he asked. "She's a young girl. I'm not sure it's appropriate for you to go traipsing into the bathroom when she's indisposed," Kalina said, standing up. "I'll let her know you're here and want to talk to her." The officer looked irritated, but he nodded and turned to Margot. "I'm told you found the body?" "Yes, sir." "I'll need to take your statement and process you for evidence." He gestured to everyone else in the room. "The rest of you stay put. I'll need to talk to you, too." Margot followed him to the kitchen, where he took out a small pad and pen. "What's your name and what are you doing here?" he asked. "Reverend Margot Quade. I'm here to celebrate New Year's Eve, although I'm not sure how that's relevant." "Not spending it with family?" he probed, setting Margot on edge. "I needed a little peace to myself. You can check with the proprietor. I have a reservation." He nodded and cleared his throat. "Tell me what happened." "I went out to the front porch about half an hour ago with a cup of coffee, and I spotted something dark against the snowdrift. I investigated and found Private Parker," Margot answered. "How well did you know the deceased?" "I didn't. Dennis Parker and I met briefly last night at dinner. From what he said, he was in the Marines and would be deploying in a few days. That was the extent of our conversation." The other officer, whose nameplate upon closer inspection identified him as Officer Vargas, appeared in the kitchen to hand over an evidence bag and wallet with a loose ID. Officer Johns glanced at the ID. "To confirm, this is Devin Parker." Margot's brow furrowed. "No, sir. His name is Dennis." Officer Johns flashed the ID for Margot to see. It bore a photo that looked like the man she'd met the night before. Only the name on the ID was indeed Devon, not Dennis. I'm confident he said his name was Dennis. He gestured to her hands. Never been to a crime scene, I take it. She didn't appreciate his tone, as if she was uneducated. He could have still been alive. I realize I dislodged snow from the wound that transferred to me. I have done my best not to touch anything until you can process me. However, I can assure you, I did not disturb any other evidence. Officer Johns tossed the evidence bag on the counter beside him. Did you notice anything suspicious or out of the ordinary? Other than the dead body? Margot pressed, hoping he wouldn't ask her more questions about Cecilia. Other than that? What do you know about the other guests? He answered with an accompanying eye roll. Not much. I only met them all last night and had very little interaction with them. This other boarder who is conveniently indisposed, what do you know about her? Nothing, she answered through pursed lips. Kalina was right, though. Someone needed to talk to Cecilia and see what she really knew about the dead man out front. That's all for now. Don't leave the premises. I may have more questions. Someone will process you shortly. Margot nodded and watched Officer Johns make his way toward the front hall. Officer, she called. He pivoted on his heel. What? He was about to deploy. Someone ought to notify the military that he won't be showing up for duty. You seem awfully interested in his life. Just looking out for a fellow soldier. The cross and dog tags hung in plain view around her neck. Let us handle things, miss. Margot bristled at the way he addressed her before he marched back outside. Officer Vargas produced another evidence bag and scraped some of the blood and snow from her fingers. Is he always so friendly? Margot asked. Officer Vargas shook his head. He thinks he's a hotshot detective. I just do what he asks, and everything will be fine. He pointed to her clothing. If you'll change out of these clothes, you'll be all set, Reverend. You can wash your hands now, too. Thank you. After scrubbing her palms until they were raw, Margot retreated to her room on the second floor and discarded her clothing, stowing them in the bag the officer had given her. She pulled on a clean sweater and saw a missed call from Sam. She hit redial and pressed the phone to her ear. Hey, how's the bed and breakfast? Sam quipped when she answered. Not nearly as restful as I'd hoped. One of the guests is dead. It looks like he was shot, Margot answered, pacing the distance from the door to the exterior wall and back again. You're kidding. Margot shook her head even though Sam couldn't see her. Afraid not. Sam, there is something off about everything. The door to her room swung inward and Kalina appeared, her face flushed. I'll fill you in when I know more, Margot answered, and ended the call. To Kalina, she said, What's wrong? Kalina's face was pale. Cecilia's gone. 4. What do you mean, gone? She said she was going to take a shower to warm up. Kalina motioned for Margot to follow her. They arrived at the bathroom to find the shower on full blast, steam fogging the mirror above the sink. There was no sign anyone had gotten into the shower stall. Where is she? Margot asked. Let's check her room, Kalina said and shut off the water. The door was closed and Margot got no answer when she knocked. She didn't like barging in on someone, but she turned the handle and the door swung inward. The room was not unlike the one Margot had been given, with a bed against one wall and a dresser on the opposite one. There were no bags in sight. Did she leave? Margot wondered aloud. We would have seen her, Kalina muttered. Not if she went out the back. Margot stepped out of the room and closed the door. None of this made sense. Are you sure she and Dennis knew each other? Kalina nodded, auburn curls bouncing against her cheeks. They showed up around the same time Chris and I did. They were in one car, but both were very particular about having different rooms. This is all so strange. The officer who questioned me said the identification they found with Dennis said his name was Devon. That can't be right. I heard Cecilia call him Dennis. Margot shrugged. I saw the ID. It had a different name, but it definitely was his picture. We need to find Cecilia. If she knows something, she needs to tell the police. Besides, even if she's in the dark, she needs to know her friend is dead. Before Kalina could say anything more, Margot retreated to the second floor to retrieve her clothing for the police. She found Officer Johns in a heated discussion with Chris. You aren't going to just come in here accusing my wife of something without any tangible evidence, Chris argued. I didn't say anything about accusing her. I need to talk to her to see what she knows about this missing guest. Who's missing? Margot interrupted. Chris let out an exasperated sigh. Cecilia. Her room is empty. No bags or anything, Kalina said. And how do you know that? Officer Johns demanded. Because I looked when I went up to let her know you wanted to speak with her. I'm happy to give a statement about what I know, Kalina said, stepping up so she was even with Margot. As the officer and Chris exchanged mutual looks of distrust, Kalina whispered in Margot's ear, Figure out where Cecilia went. I'll keep him busy. 5. After handing off the evidence bag of clothing to Officer Vargas, Margot retreated to her room to give Sam another call. Her cousin answered on the first ring. What's going on? Like I said before, a guest was found shot to death this morning. There seems to be a mix-up with his identification. Can you run the name Dennis Parker and see if anything comes up? I've got a bad feeling about all of this and can't seem to shake it. I'll see what I can find, but if he's never set foot in Port Marie, I doubt I'll find anything useful. Thanks for checking anyway, Margot said. One of the other guests is missing. She might have information about who wanted to hurt the victim. I thought you went on this little getaway to, get away from all of this getting mixed up with murders stuff. Kalina had said much the same thing, and Margot let out a small laugh. I did, and I'm not the only one, apparently. I'm going to do some more digging and see what I can find out. Call me if you find anything. She ended the call and stowed her phone in her pocket. Knowing she was about to do some not entirely legal snooping, she donned her winter gloves before making the trek to the third floor again. With only 2 officers on scene, they likely hadn't had time to process Cecilia's or Dennis's rooms. She re-entered Cecilia's first. The lack of belongings still set Margot on edge. The girl must have come with clothes and other items one typically brings when staying away from home. Unless she hadn't had time to bring much with her? Margot checked under the bed, which had clearly not been slept in the night before, and moved to the closet. With one hand on the knob, she paused, listening to the space around her. Her military training told her something was off here, but she couldn't quite put her finger on it. She eased the closet door open and found a duffel bag with a few sweaters and a pair of jeans stuffed haphazardly inside. If Cecilia was still around, she'd left her things behind, although Margot still couldn't wrap her head around what would give the young woman a motive to kill Private Parker. Perhaps Margot would have better luck in his room. She heard the heavy fall of footsteps on the stairs below her just as she reached the second room in the hallway. A crash from within the room drew her attention, and she nudged the door open with her foot. Cecilia leaned over an unmade bed, sheets and blankets bunched to the foot. Fatigues lay sprawled on the floor, the rest of Dennis's belongings strewn about. Cecilia looked up as the door swung inward with a soft hiss. "What are you doing in here?" she demanded. "I was going to ask you the same thing. I thought you came up here to take a shower, Margot replied. Cecilia at least appeared to have changed into dry clothes. It's none of your business, Cecilia muttered. Margot stepped forward, holding her hands loosely at her side in a non-threatening manner. You may think it isn't, but there are police downstairs. A man is dead. And I have to admit, you rifling through someone else's belongings isn't going to make you look innocent. She couldn't bring herself to say the word guilty because she couldn't fathom why this young girl would shoot anyone. Who's dead? Cecilia rasped. It looks like Private Parker, Margot answered, moving to sit by the other woman. While she didn't see a reason for Cecilia to be the culprit, she also wasn't going to share any information she'd gained from the police with her either. Cecilia, can you tell me how you know Private Parker? I don't know him, she said quickly, her hands twisting into knots in her lap. That's not what I've heard from other people. They said you came together. They're wrong. We just arrived at the same time. Cecilia stood up and moved to the doorway. I don't know him, but he can't be dead. Want to explain why you were going through a stranger's belongings, then? I thought he took something of mine. I was wrong. She wiped at her eyes, revealing ashen bruises on her left wrist. She saw Margot looking and quickly tugged the hem down. Can I go back to my room now? I think it might be better if you went downstairs to talk to the police. Give your statement before you do anything else. Oh, yeah, I guess I can do that. Cecilia cast one last look around the room before Margot led her back to the first floor. Shouts from the front hall erupted as they reached the landing. Officer Johns shoved Kalina toward a wall, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. Get your hands off my wife, Chris bellowed, trying to get between the officer and Kalina. We found the weapon in your wife's bag, Officer Johns said with a far too casual shrug. He gestured with his free hand to a handgun sitting in a clear evidence bag on the reception desk. I don't own a gun, Kalina's voice was strained, and the color drained from her cheeks, making her red curls stand out even more against her pale face. Sir, shouldn't we test our hands for gunshot residue before we jump to such conclusions? Officer Vargas suggested. Officer Johns glared at the man, then caught sight of Margot and Cecilia in the small space. Margot cleared her throat. This is Cecilia. She's ready to give her statement. Cecilia's eyes turned the size of saucers at the sight of Officer Johns. The other officer stepped up and put a hand on the girl's shoulder. She flinched at his touch, and he took a step back. I'll take your statement if you wouldn't mind coming with me, Officer Vargas said softly, leading Cecilia away from the scene in the front hall. Margot stepped up beside Chris. I'm sure we can sort this all out. Kalina came outside with me shortly after I discovered the body. Besides, I have no reason to kill anyone. I didn't know him, Kalina insisted, struggling against the officer's grip. Please, test my hands. You'll see I haven't fired a gun. Officer John's gaze shifted from Margot to Chris to Kalina and back. With an unnecessarily rough shove, he released his grasp and disappeared out to his patrol car. What is his problem? Kalina hissed before he returned. He probably wants to prove himself, so he's trying to solve this case fast rather than doing his due diligence. I'm tempted to report him to his superiors, Chris grumbled. Officer Johns returned and swabbed Kalina's hands, a scowl tugging at his pale cheeks. Fine. He turned to Margot and Chris. Any objection if I test you two as well? Chris held his hands out. Go ahead. Officer John swabbed his and then Margot's hands. A look of disappointment fell over his face as he came up negative on all three of them. He stormed out of the house again, this time climbing into the passenger seat of the patrol car and slamming the door. Margot had expected him to test everyone in the house. Surely it would have given a quick answer as to whether anyone had fired a gun. Is he going to test everyone else? She turned to Officer Vargas. I'm sure he will, he answered, and turned to Cecilia, ushering her into the kitchen to take her statement. What was that all about? Caroline appeared from the dining room. She seemed more composed than when the police had first arrived. Just a misunderstanding, Kalina said, and rubbed at her forearm. Did they find Cecilia? Caroline's tone carried a hint of accusation, as if she'd already decided the girl had a hand in why there was a dead man on her front lawn. She's giving her statement, Margot answered. There were still too many missing pieces to this puzzle, and Margot couldn't help wanting to find out what they were. She'd barely known Private Parker, but she felt a kinship to another man in uniform. He deserved to see justice done. Can I talk to you? She whispered, nudging Kalina's shoulder. The two women retreated to the second-floor landing. When she felt they had privacy, Margot whispered, I found Cecilia going through Private Parker's room. She said she thought he'd taken something of hers. Also, I noticed a few old bruises on her wrists, like someone had grabbed her and pulled hard. Kalina nodded. I noticed them too. You don't think Dennis, or Devon, or whatever his name is, hurt her? Margot shrugged. Someone clearly did. She denied knowing him when I talked to her just now, although I could tell she was lying. Chris would say I'm a little too nosy, but I watched the two of them interact. If anything, it looked like he was helping her. I reached out to my cousin, who is an officer in the police department back home, just to see if anything comes up in the criminal database. Chris did the same, but hasn't heard back yet. As much as I don't want to believe Cecilia could have pulled the trigger, she was acting strange this morning. I caught her sneaking inside from the back of the house, and she wasn't in a coat. It was like she'd gone outside in a hurry and was trying to hide something. Margot stepped into the bedroom she'd been assigned and peered out the window. Whoever killed Dennis tried to frame you. Any idea why they'd pick you? Kalina joined her by the window and shook her head. Honestly, no. I mean, we don't know for sure that the gun they found is the murder weapon. Officer Johns seemed to think so. There's something off about him. I think Chris is right, and he's just trying to prove himself, Kalina replied. Margot had her doubts. From the moment he'd arrived at the tiny bed and breakfast, Officer Johns had been hurrying through his investigation and then ignoring easy ways to rule out suspects. She longed to have Sam working the case. At least then Margot knew the police wouldn't do a rushed job just to get closure. As she gazed down at the snowbanks filling the backyard, she spotted footprints along the back of the house. The wind had been whipping around as the morning progressed. If the footprints had been old, the weather would have obscured them. These were fresh. I want to know what Cecilia was looking for upstairs, Kalina announced, interrupting Margot's focus. Kalina was out of the room and on the flight of stairs leading to the top floor before Margot had time to process her words. Should she follow the other woman or investigate the footprints? She pulled out her phone and zoomed in as much as she could before snapping a few photos of the tracks from her vantage point. By the time she reached Private Parker's room, Kalina was standing in the doorway, mouth agape. Margot squeezed past the other woman to find the room was empty. The fatigues and pack were gone. It looked as if Private Parker had packed up and shipped out without anyone noticing. This just keeps getting stranger, Margot murmured, just as her phone rang. She pressed it to her ear without checking the caller ID. Hello? Margot, it's Sam. I didn't find anything on a Dennis Parker in our records, other than he was issued a driver's license when he was 16. But I've got quite a few open warrants for a Devon Parker, same date of birth. Thanks, Sam. Who is this man? 6. The two women stood side by side in the room, silently, as the situation settled over them. Kalina was the first to recover from the shock. "There's got to be an explanation for all of this. Why would he have a driver's license in the same state with two different names?" she asked. Margot was beginning to suspect one possibility. Brothers, perhaps. What if it's two different people? "What, you think he's got a criminal twin brother out there?" Kalina scoffed. Margot nodded. Why not? It would explain why the man we met had a different name. I bet if we were to check military records, we would find that Private Dennis Parker is set to deploy in a couple days, just like he said. But how did Devon end up dead then? And if that is, in fact, Devon out there, where'd Dennis go? All good questions to which Margot didn't have any answers. There was more to the story with Cecilia, and they needed to find out what it was. "I have an idea, but it's not exactly legal," Margot said, lowering her voice out of an abundance of caution. "I'm listening." Kalina's green eyes sparkled with anticipation. "We both get the sense there's more to the connection between Dennis and Cecilia. Officer Johns doesn't seem in a hurry to process her room or Dennis's either. We could take another look around, just to see if we missed something." Kalina smiled, but arched a brow. "You have this look like you're about to crawl out of your skin. The idea of doing something questionably legal makes you uncomfortable, doesn't it?" "Of course it does. I spent years in a military command structure. Disobeying one's superiors or stepping out of line wasn't just frowned upon. It was met with swift repercussions. Besides, as a reverend, I'm not exactly happy about breaking the law." "Well, like you said, it isn't really a crime scene yet." The conversation died when footsteps signaled that they had company in the hallway. A light knock on the door preceded Chris's appearance. He said, "The officers have left for now, but they asked that everyone stay put for additional questioning as needed." "They think the real crime happened outside, too. And they've got the murder weapon. It should be easy to figure out who had it last," Kalina said. He cleared his throat and nudged the door shut behind him. "If I were running this investigation, I'd have moved everyone off premises and closed this whole place off as a crime scene, no matter if the crime occurred outside. I can't believe these guys are that incompetent. I've put in a call to some friends to see what I can find on Officer Johns and his partner." "We think Dennis may have had a brother," Margot shared. If she was comfortable enough to share the theory with Kalina, she figured it was safe to voice it with Kalina's husband. After all, had Sam been there, Margot would have done the same thing. "We can do some low-key digging. Nothing that would run afoul of the law, just to confirm. If we can give the officers any other information, I'm sure they wouldn't say no." Kalina looped her arm through Chris's and gazed at him. "That's how we work." The forced smile on Chris's face told Margot he wasn't thrilled about his wife's statement, although he didn't contradict it. Chris detached himself from his wife's embrace and gave them both a pointed look. "I'm going to check on our host. I'll let her know you two will be down in 20 minutes for an early lunch." He left them in Margot's room in silence. Margot couldn't hide her surprise. Did he really just give us a window to look around? He doesn't always like it when I nose in on a case, but he's accepted by this point that it's bound to happen. I know we came here to get away from the drama, but I guess we just aren't that lucky. Or maybe it had nothing to do with luck. Margot had come here seeking the same sort of refuge, but clearly God had other plans. She couldn't believe it was a coincidence that she and Kalina were here at the same time. "Come on," Margot said. "Let's see what we can find in Cecilia's room before we have to see Caroline about lunch." They trekked up to the 3rd floor again and entered the first room past the bathroom. The closet with Cecilia's meager belongings remained open. Margot had remembered to bring along her gloves again and pulled the bag loose from its hiding place. She set the contents on the bed. As she'd observed earlier, there were only a couple changes of clothes along with a cell phone buried at the very bottom of the bag. Margot picked it up and had her finger poised to hit the power button when a sharp intake of breath from behind her stopped Margot mid-motion. Both she and Kalina turned to see Cecilia standing in the doorway, white as a sheet. "We know you're scared by everything that's going on right now, but we want to help," Margot said, setting the phone on the bed in what she hoped was a gesture of goodwill. She was giving Cecilia a chance to reveal whatever secrets might be hidden on the phone. "Please, talk to us. We can help, we promise," Kalina added. "How did you know Dennis?" Cecilia tugged on the sleeves of her oversized sweater. "He's my friend. He was helping me get out of a bad situation. Or at least I thought he was. Now he's missing." "Did his brother Devin have anything to do with the bad situation you were in?" Margot asked. Cecilia burst into tears. "Come on," Margot said, patting the bed. "Sit down and tell us what happened." 7. Cecilia slumped onto the bed, drawing her knees to her chest. She looked so young, staring up at them behind long lashes with dark eyes. Margot suspected she was trying to hide within herself out of a sense of fear. "Things were great at first. Devin was funny and charming. But after a while, things got complicated." Cecilia tugged at her sleeves again. "He hurt you," Margot said softly, and she nodded. "He'd always apologize after. He would just get upset sometimes. I knew it wasn't right, but most of the time he was so sweet. I felt like maybe a part of me was just overreacting. Then Dennis came over one time, and he saw Devin get upset. The two of them got into a fight. I thought Dennis was going to kill Devin. He beat him up pretty badly. Threatened to do worse if he laid a hand on me again." Cecilia's shoulders relaxed as the words poured out of her. Margot was beginning to get an idea of where this story was leading, and it wasn't good. "How long ago was that?" The young woman kneaded her hands together, her gaze darting between Margot and Kalina. "A few weeks ago. Honestly, I was more surprised that Devin had a twin brother. The more I thought about it, I realized it was kind of weird that he never talked about his family. Well, that, and he didn't want me to meet them." "But you met Dennis, and he defended you," Kalina reiterated. Cecilia nodded. "Things got really bad a couple days ago, and Devin lost his temper." She pushed up the sleeves of her sweater to reveal the bruises Margot had caught sight of earlier. "He grabbed me so hard, I thought he was going to break my wrists. I called Dennis, and he told me to pack a bag and go to the bus stop near where I work. He met me there, and we came here." "You were very brave to make the choice to get away from Devin," Margot said. "Dennis said he would help me get out of town without Devin knowing before he deployed. We were supposed to leave tomorrow." "Did you ever go to the police for help?" Kalina blurted. Margot turned toward the other woman, wanting to admonish her, but finding Kalina's cheeks were already flushed in embarrassment. Gently, Margot said, "She sought help where she could." "I called the police a couple times at first, but nothing happened," Cecilia said. "They would show up, Devin would tell them everything was fine, and they would leave." Margot had to imagine the police force was small in town. Sam had mentioned Devin had a criminal record. Sam hadn't elaborated, but perhaps another call was in order. Or perhaps Chris would find something useful from his own search. "Do you think Dennis was actually capable of harming his brother?" Margot clasped her hands in her lap. She wanted to physically comfort the woman in front of her, but she didn't know if physical contact would trigger negative feelings in Cecilia. She wanted to help, not hurt. "I had to pull him off the last time. It was really hard, so... yeah, I think he could." Margot glanced at her phone to check the time. Their window for snooping was about to expire. Chris expected them both downstairs to share a meal with their hostess. "Thank you for sharing. I think Caroline is putting together some food downstairs for lunch. Why don't you join us?" Cecilia fidgeted, but swung her legs over the side of the bed and stood up. "You aren't going to tell anyone what I told you, are you?" Before Margot could say she couldn't make promises, Kalina mimed zipping her lips and tossing away the key. "Come on, let's go get something to eat." Margot watched the two women disappear down the hallway. Something about Cecilia's story bothered Margot. She showed signs of discomfort when sharing her history with her abusive boyfriend. Still, Margot had expected more emotion, given that all signs pointed to the fact he was dead. Shouldn't she be relieved he's dead? It was a terrible thought, but it was the one that popped into Margot's head. Cecilia was free of the man who had caused her pain, and yet she still carried him with her, like an albatross. As she stepped into the hallway, the sound of a door creaking on its hinges caught her attention. She paused and held her breath, waiting for the sound to come again, but it didn't. Still, the training she'd relied on for so long overseas told her she wasn't alone. No one had seen Dennis since the night before. If he had lashed out at his brother for some reason, maybe he'd come back to fulfill his promise to Cecilia. Margot moved down the hall to the missing man's room. The door was ajar, and she once again pushed it open. Unlike the last time she'd taken stock of it, it was now empty. Someone had cleared out the space. But who? And why? 8. Margot was the last one to enter the dining room. She was surprised to see how normal it looked, given the chaos of the morning. She settled in a seat by the front window. Everyone else had crowded as far from the outside view as possible. She glanced out to see a single strip of police tape waving in the winter air. She could spot the disturbed snow where she'd found Devon's body. "I can't believe someone actually died here," Valerie said, for once not consumed by her phone. "Nana, you have to advertise as the haunted bed and breakfast now. You'll do awesome business at Halloween." "A man is dead, Valerie. Have some respect," Caroline snapped. Her cheery demeanor from the night before had vanished, replaced by something cold and haunted. "Just saying," Valerie mumbled into her sandwich. Margot busied herself with putting together a sandwich of her own, although she didn't feel much like eating. Cecilia sat across the table looking uncomfortable, wedged between Chris and Kalina. Margot gave the young woman a smile and kept the news that it appeared Dennis had taken off to herself. Something about this whole situation seemed strange. If Dennis had indeed shot his brother, why hide the weapon in another guest's belongings? If he was planning to leave, why not take it with him? Certainly, that would ensure it wouldn't be tied back to him. Although, from the little time she'd observed of the man at dinner and what Kalina had shared from his stay before Margot's arrival, running didn't seem like the type of thing Dennis Parker would do. He'd defended a woman he didn't know from his brother's abuse. He'd promised to help her out of a dangerous situation. He didn't seem the type to kill someone and run from the consequences. "You're awfully quiet, Reverend," Caroline said from Margot's left. "I'm sorry. I'm still processing everything from this morning, trying to figure out how it could have happened." Caroline inclined her head, her gray hair bobbing with the gesture. "I just can't imagine having so much hate in one's heart to take a life." Margot had witnessed death during her tour of duty, some of it as a result of the jobs they'd been sent to fulfill, other times born out of the cruelty of human greed. Knowing a trip down memory lane wasn't beneficial, she said, "I wonder where Dennis has gone, if indeed his brother is dead." "He did seem like such a nice young man. His poor family, losing one son and the other disappearing." Margot only nodded in silence. She wanted to take another look in Dennis's room to see if he might have left a clue as to where he'd gone and why he had abandoned Cecilia after promising her safe passage. "If you don't mind," Margot said, "I think I'm going to head back upstairs. I need a little space." "Of course," Caroline said, folding her hands on the table. Margot stood and was halfway out of the dining room when a flash of red curls out of the corner of her eye told her she would not be leaving alone. Margot carried her plate into the kitchen and set it in the sink, Kalina hot on her heels. "Chris said he hasn't gotten much from Ellsworth PD. Devin had some open warrants and a criminal history mostly related to gambling. Cecilia did say he would get angry sometimes. If he was a gambler and was losing, that could trigger outbursts," Margot said softly. "I wish we could find where Dennis went. If we could just get his side of the story," Kalina sighed. "I think he's taken off. Before I came down, I heard noise coming from Dennis's room. But when I checked, it was empty." "Maybe the police took it for evidence?" Kalina's flat tone told Margot that even she didn't believe her own words. "I don't see how some fatigues and an army pack would be very useful to the investigation," Margot said, dismissing the suggestion. Still, Kalina's words about finding Dennis sparked an idea. "Does Chris have access to Dennis's last known address?" "He does. What are you thinking?" "That if we check out where he lives, maybe we can figure out where he's gone." "Chris wouldn't be happy with me pulling the information," Kalina said. But the glint in her eye told Margot the other woman was willing to risk her husband being unhappy with her if it meant solving the mystery. "How long do you need to find the information?" Kalina pursed her lips. "Give me 10 minutes. I can meet you out front in 15. Margot stood on the front porch 15 minutes later, waiting for Kalina. The spot where they'd taken away Devin's body remained disturbed, although there was far less blood than she would have thought. Maybe the cold had stopped the blood flow prematurely. "I've got it," Kalina announced as she appeared on the porch and dangled a set of car keys in one hand. Margot followed the other woman to a small car parked on the street. Kalina plugged the address into her phone's GPS. The system said Dennis's place was only a 10-minute drive away. "So, how often do you go chasing after potential killers?" Margot asked as Kalina pulled away from the curb. Kalina laughed. "Not much since we had our daughter. I kind of promised Chris I'd give it up. Besides, it felt like that part of my life was done. I'd put to bed some of my town's old mysteries, you know." "I do. In fact, since I've been back home, I've put to rest several of the painful memories from my own town's past." "You'd think coming back to a small town would mean less drama. Though I swear there was more death in Ellsworth in a 9-month period than in all of Boston in the entire time I went to school and lived there." It was Margot's turn to laugh. "I felt the same way after coming home from my deployment. But there's also something nice about helping people to heal. It's partly why I went into ministry. I wanted to use that connection to God to help guide people through dark times. I was able to do it with my unit members overseas, and I like to think I've had a positive impact on the members of my congregation since coming home." "You just wish you didn't have to do it on vacation." Kalina rolled to a stop at a red light and checked the directions. "Exactly," Margot agreed. "You know, while you were giving your statement to the police, I was watching the forensic technician examine Devin's body. I noticed something odd about his hands." "What do you mean?" "So, when we were coming downstairs, Cecilia told me that Devin bites his nails. Sort of a nervous habit. But Devin's hands, the nails were neatly trimmed." "Are you sure? I mean, it's not like you got a good look at his hands." "I shared enough meals with the man to notice his nails were trimmed." "So, what are you saying?" Margot prodded. "I don't know. Maybe Devin let his nails grow out and he started taking better care of them. Or maybe that wasn't actually Devin." We both thought it was Dennis at first, Margot said. But that's because we didn't know he had a twin brother. Why would he have his brother's ID on him? I don't know. Let's hope he's at home so we can ask him. Kalina pulled up to the curb outside a 2-story townhouse, the driveway in front of Dennis's unit empty. A silver sedan sat parked in the driveway to the right. Margot thought she caught a flash of movement behind a curtain on the upper level as they climbed out and approached the front door. Margot knocked twice and rang the bell, hoping it was enough to draw whoever was inside down to the first floor. They waited side by side for a good 5 minutes before the front door opened, and Dennis, or a man who could pass for him, stared out at them. He opened it just wide enough to speak through. "Hi, we're glad you're at home," Margot said, stepping up and putting her hand on the doorknob. His 5 o'clock shadow was more noticeable than the night before, and Margot caught the shadow of a bruise forming under his right eye. His gaze didn't register any recognition at the sight of them. "You look a little confused. It's Margot and Kalina from last night," Margot offered. "Oh, right. Sorry, I'm kind of busy. What do you want?" "Well, we were hoping to ask you what you knew about your brother being found dead this morning," Kalina answered. His eyes narrowed, but he didn't open the door to let them in. "He had what was coming to him." That didn't sound like the young man she'd met the night before. "What made you take off? You had to know the police needed to take a statement," Margot said. "I just needed to get out of there, that's all. Too much going on," he said, his gaze darting to the street beyond them. "Cecilia was worried about you," Margot pressed, trying to inch closer to him. "Well, tell her I'm fine. Look, I need to go. I'll stop by and give the cops a statement." He slammed the door in their faces. Margot reached out to knock again, but Kalina caught her wrist, stopping her mid-motion. "I don't think knocking again is going to make him any more talkative." "No, but that also didn't seem to be the same man we met at the bed and breakfast." "People react differently to stress," Kalina commented. "But you're right. He didn't have any sort of emotional response when we mentioned his dead brother. Even if they had a contentious relationship, he would have felt something." The front door to the other unit opened, and an elderly woman with thick Coke bottle glasses stuck her head out. "Something wrong?" "No, ma'am," Margot answered. Dennis's neighbors didn't need to be dragged into the mystery of a dead man. "You know, he told me he was going off to war. Said he wouldn't be coming back for months. Left me his keys and everything. Then he shows up again looking like something's chasing him. I asked him if he was okay, but he just ignored me," she said. "Deploying is a complicated time," Margot said. She ushered Kalina back to the car as the older woman stepped back into her home. "We need to tell the police what we suspect before he skips town." 9. The trip back to Belvedere B&B took hardly any time at all, and what they found upon their return surprised both Margot and Kalina. A small crowd had gathered across the street, ogling the property as if it were a sideshow attraction. Officers Johns and Vargas had returned, the former corralling the onlookers as Margot and Kalina climbed out of the car. "What's that about?" Kalina wondered aloud as they approached Officer Vargas. "People in this town are nosy when it suits them," he answered, glaring at the crowd. Margot studied the assembled group and noted the mixture of people seemed odd, even for a small town. There were people dressed in suits and ties, messenger bags slung over their chests, and several older women with fur hats who looked like they'd come out of their nearby homes. Also, there was a slender man in a long gray trench coat, standing a little off to one side as Officer Johns addressed them. "Move along, folks. Nothing to see here." "Well, obviously there is. I'm fairly certain Caroline Belvedere didn't decide to decorate for the new year with police tape," one of the women retorted. I'm sure you'll all read about what happened in the paper, Officer Johns replied. The slender man stepped away from the group, glancing at what Margot guessed was a phone in his hand, before walking down the street. A news van rolled up across the street, drawing Officer John's attention. Officer Vargas led Margot and Kalina around the back of the house. The footprints Margot had noticed earlier were still visible. He pulled out a pen and pad and nodded for Margot to speak. "Well, we don't think the man who died is Devon after all," she began. "For one thing, I noticed these boot prints earlier," she continued, gesturing to the footprints in the snow. "I know military boot treads, and all Private Parker had with him were his uniform boots. These were made by a normal boot." "I see. I'll look into it. Is there anything else that makes you think it wasn't Devon?" Officer Vargas leaned closer, pen poised above his pad. "Kalina noticed his nails were trimmed, and we have it on good authority that Devon was a nail-biter." "And how do you know about the nail-biting?" he prodded. "We talked to Cecilia," Margot admitted. "That would be the same young woman who denied knowing anything about the man you two found?" Margot hadn't realized Cecilia had been untruthful with the police. Although, if she'd had brushes with the law thanks to Devon's abuse, and no action had been taken, Margot could see how it might make Cecilia leery of cooperating. Still, lying to the police was a crime, too. She confided in us that Devon was her boyfriend. She was leaving him, and Private Parker was helping her make a clean break. Officer Vargas sighed, clipping his pen to his shirt. "I thought she looked familiar. We responded to a few domestic dispute calls, but Officer Johns always handled things." "What do you mean, handled things?" Kalina asked. "From what Cecilia told us, the police would show up, then Devon would convince them everything was fine, and they would leave." "Honestly, he's my training officer, and when he told me to stay in the hallway, I listened. I knew something felt off, but I didn't want to make waves." He gestured to his face. "I don't exactly fit the mold of what a cop looks like in this town. They'd think I was crying wolf to get attention. And now a man is dead." "Did you run his prints, even though you found the ID on him?" Margot pressed. His caramel complexion paled. "Officer Johns said he ran them, and confirmed they belonged to Devon Parker. But I didn't actually see him run them." "Is there any reason Officer Johns would want everyone to think Devon is the one who is dead?" Margot thought she might have an idea, at least as to why Devon might want people to believe he was dead. "I can't believe he would. He's a good police officer," he answered. "Even good police can go bad for the right reasons," Kalina said. "Look, I'll run the prints again, but whether that's Devon or Dennis, we have our shooter. I don't know what story Cecilia told you, but she's not some innocent victim. We tested her hands, and it came back positive for gunshot residue." Before Kalina or Margot could speak, he retreated around the side of the house. "You don't think they're right, do you?" Kalina's voice was high with tension. "It's possible. Anything is. I mean, if she thought she'd killed Devon, that would mean she was free from his abuse once and for all. It could explain why she seemed so dispassionate. Maybe she was trying to cover her motives." "But if it was Dennis she really shot, what motive would she have for that? By her own account, he was basically her savior," Kalina argued. "They're twins. If it was dark out, if she was afraid, maybe she got confused and shot the wrong brother." Still, that didn't explain how Devon had found them. Margot got the distinct impression Dennis had brought Cecilia here because Devon didn't know where they were. If it turns out that we're right, and the man we saw in Dennis's townhouse apartment was in fact Devon, that's going to devastate her. Commotion from the front of the house drew them back to the front yard. The news van that had pulled up was running cameras on a young-faced male reporter as Officer Johns led Cecilia out the front door in handcuffs. There are still pieces of this that don't fit, Margot murmured. How did Cecilia get a gun? How had Devon found them? Why was Officer Johns turning a blind eye to the evidence and jumping to conclusions before doing his due diligence? I was thinking the same thing, Kalina said, as her husband stepped onto the front porch and gestured for them to join him inside. They ended up back in the kitchen. Where are Caroline and her granddaughter? Margot glanced around for any sign of their hostess. In Caroline's room. When the officers came in to arrest Cecilia, things got a little heated. They threatened Caroline with obstruction charges. We did some digging, and we think that was really Dennis who was killed, Kalina informed Chris. What makes you so sure? We went to Dennis's apartment, and the man there didn't seem to recognize us, and he pretty much told us to leave. Plus, his neighbor said he'd locked up his apartment ahead of his deployment. Left his keys with her, in fact. But then he shows up again, and in a hurry. I bet you if the police went to his place, they would find it a mess, Kalina explained. Besides, if Dennis had been lurking around the place, his boot treads would have shown up in the snow, Margot added. I spotted treads, but they didn't look like military issue. I thought I'd heard someone in Dennis's room earlier, too. It's possible Devon could have snuck in after the police left and collected his brother's belongings to make it appear that Dennis had left. She expected Chris to admonish them for investigating when they had no right to do so. Sam certainly would have, had she been present, even if she would have later told Margot she was grateful for the help. Somehow, though, he looked relieved, like he'd had suspicions of his own, and they'd just confirmed them. He said, I did some asking around, unofficially, of course, and the warrants out for Devon were all related to illegal gambling. We found that, too. I suppose if he was in deep with a bookie, maybe faking his death was the best way he could think of to disappear. Impersonate his twin brother who was deploying, and he could go almost anywhere. People wouldn't know to ask the Marine Corps whether he showed up or not. They'd just assume he'd gone overseas, Margot said. Great supposition, but how do we prove it? Kalina leaned against the sink, bumping an empty coffee cup. When I came downstairs, Margot said, there was already a cup of coffee made. I didn't think much of it, but what if Devon had convinced Dennis to see him one last time before he left town and had intended to just share a cup of coffee with his brother before things turned deadly? Chris nodded, but he didn't look convinced. It's all good in theory, like Cal said, but we don't have proof. Officer Vargas is running the victim's prints again. I wish we could talk to Cecilia, just to get her side of the story. If we knew what she was thinking, maybe we could find a way to help her. If, indeed, she's the shooter, she's a victim in all of this, as much as whoever she shot, Margot said. As if on cue, Officer Vargas appeared in the hallway, looking grim. He approached their trio, hands in his pockets. What's wrong? Chris asked. You two are right. The man you found this morning is Dennis Parker, not Devon. Fingerprints confirm it. What does this mean? Kalina pressed. Margot and Chris closed in around the officer. They might have been alone in the small space, but whatever he was about to say made it feel like they were about to become conspirators. It means my partner lied, he said. I need to know why. 10. We want to help in whatever way we can, Margot said after a moment of strained silence. But do you think you could get us in to see Cecilia? Just for a few minutes. We have our suspicions as to why she may have done what she did, but we want to be sure. She's a victim, too. It's not legal, but I'll see if I can sneak you into holding. I went back over the calls we received and confirmed that she was the caller. Officer Vargas's eyes shone with unshed tears. All domestic disputes, and I was there on those calls. I could have done something to help her, but I let my own fear keep me silent. I am not going to do that anymore." After a breath, he added, "Come down to the station. I'll do what I can." "Thank you," Margot replied, squeezing his hand. After he'd left, she turned to Galena and Chris. "See what you can find on Officer Johns. He fits into this puzzle somehow. I am starting to think it's more than just looking the other way on domestic disputes. I'm going to talk to Cecilia and see if she'll confirm what we've speculated." She had one other stop she wanted to make, too. The trip to the station was a brisk walk, but Margot didn't mind the fresh air or the time to think in private. The crowd had dispersed once Cecilia had been arrested, although Margot suspected the local news would be replaying the scene during the evening news. Too bad they had the wrong story, or at the very least, not the whole story. She was within 20 paces of the station when her phone rang. Sam's face flashed on the screen. "Hey, Sam, now's not the best time to talk," Margot answered. "Oh, I was just calling to see how you were doing. I know this isn't your first body, but it's the first one you can't look into." "How wrong you are. An arrest has been made, but I don't think the police have the full picture. I'm trying to see what I can do to help the truth get out." "So you aren't staying out of it?" Sam's tone was amused rather than annoyed or disapproving. "You know me, Sam. You couldn't possibly think I wouldn't seek justice. Look, when everything's been sorted out, I'll tell you all about it. I promise." "You better. And be careful, okay? I want my cousin to come home in one piece." She ended the call and walked into the tiny station. The officer she was looking for stood out in the smattering of sparsely populated desks. He met her at the entrance to the bullpen and ushered her to the back, where 2 cells took up most of the available space. Cecilia sat in one of the cells, pressed in the corner. "I can buy you 5 minutes," the officer said. 10 at most, so be quick." "Thank you again, officer. I know this is not playing by the rules." He shook his head. "Be quick," he repeated before leaving the 2 women alone. "What are you doing here?" Cecilia asked, her tone hoarse. Redness under her eyes signaled she'd been crying. "I wanted to hear your side of the story, Cecilia. Please, it might help." The other woman gave a bitter laugh. "Help? There's nothing you can do." "Telling someone else what happened might make what you face easier. I have to believe the circumstances of what you endured will factor in." "You're not from around here, Reverend. No one is going to care that he hurt me. They'll just see me as violent. The judges and lawyers don't care about people like me." "So you did shoot him?" Cecilia nodded. "And I'm not sorry. I don't know how he found me, but he showed up this morning. Dennis didn't know I'd taken Devon's gun with me when I left. I figured if I had it, he couldn't use it on me. And he didn't. I'm going to jail, but he can't hurt me anymore." Margot reached through the cell bars, gesturing for Cecilia to come closer. The other woman stayed put. "Cecilia, I'm so sorry, but the man you shot wasn't Devon. The police confirmed it was Dennis." "No, they didn't. It was Devon. They found his ID on the body." "They ran his fingerprints, and it isn't Devon. I'm so sorry." Cecilia's eyes widened to the size of saucers. "You mean he's still alive?" "I'm afraid so. Do you have any idea why he might have wanted Dennis dead?" "Their fight was huge, but it was Dennis who said he'd kill Devon if he laid a hand on me again. Devon was so wrapped up in his addiction, I don't think he really believed him." "Gambling," Margot posited. "How do you know?" "It wasn't hard to find out he had a record and some outstanding warrants." "You must think I'm a horrible person, and I'm going to hell." "I don't. Not on either count. I think you made a mistake based on the circumstances you were trying to escape. I may be a minister, but I don't know that I believe in hell. Not for people who are redeemable. And you are, Cecilia. Please, can I help you get an attorney? One who will fight for you?" Cecilia's eyes sparkled with unshed tears, but she nodded. "Okay. I don't know why you're being so nice to me." "You deserve a second chance, and you have more people in your corner than you think. I'll be back." "Where are you going?" Cecilia called as Margot started for the door. "To find the last piece to this puzzle." Margot stood on the front porch of Dennis's apartment and knocked. She wasn't sure he would still be there. Still, if he'd seen the commotion surrounding Cecilia, he might have decided to stick around for just a little longer. He'd orchestrated all of this. He needed to pay for what he'd done. She knocked harder a second time. Still no reply, but when she tried the handle, the door swung inward. She wasn't normally reckless, but she could take care of herself. Her army training had made sure of that. Besides, Devon wouldn't be the first person she subdued. "Anyone home?" she called, crossing the threshold. The apartment, much like Kalina had suspected earlier, was a mess. Clothing and drawers were strewn on the floor. She made her way deeper into the place, finding the bedroom at the back of the first floor. This was the most obvious sign of disruption. Hangers littered the room, and a safe sat open on the floor, emptied of whatever had been inside. Given the gun case, Margot suspected Devon was once again armed. A phone sat charging on the nightstand by the bed. Using a tissue to pick it up, she hit the power button. An image of who she assumed was Devon and Cecilia filled the screen. She swiped across the screen, and the phone unlocked without a passcode. Navigating to recent texts, she found an exchange with Dennis from the night before. "Devon, 11:28 p.m. Where are you? I don't want to leave things like we did. I want to say a real goodbye before you leave." Dennis, 11:31 p.m. Not interested. Devon, 11:32 p.m. Please, bro. I know I screwed up. I'm not like you. I got issues, but I want to be better. Please, man. You're going off to war, and I don't know when I'm going to see you again. Dennis, 11:37 p.m. I'll think about it. There was a 5-hour gap in the messages. Dennis, 5:07 a.m. I'll send you the address, but it has to be quick. I've got to head out soon. Devon, 5:12 a.m. I'll be there. Margot still wondered if Devon had known his girlfriend was in his brother's company when he'd headed over to the bed and breakfast that morning. Or had he been intending to kill his brother all along and simply let Cecilia take the fall? Margot left the bedroom in search of a baggie she could use to store the evidence, not wanting to disturb the scene any more than she already had. Just as she found a resealable plastic bag in the kitchen, a car door slammed out front. Margot pocketed the phone in the protective bag and pressed herself to the wall of the kitchen, attempting to stay out of sight. The front door opened with a boom as someone's foot connected with the wood. "Find him," a baritone voice ordered, and footsteps spread out upstairs and down the hall where Margot had just been. She chanced to look into the front hall and spotted the slender man in the trench coat. "He's not here, boss," one of the men called from the back of the house. "He's not dumb enough to ditch his phone." "But you heard what the news lady said. He's dead." "I'll be the judge of that," Trenchcoat replied, sending chills down Margot's spine. She prayed the phone didn't have a ringer on as he pressed his own device to his ear. "You sure it's the right guy, officer?" Trenchcoat started to pace. Margot's heart stopped. There were more than just a few officers in the Collingwood police force, but she knew of only one who'd had suspect dealings with Devon in the past. Trenchcoat hung up his call and snapped his fingers. "Come on. Our friend says we can view the body at the morgue to be sure, but he ran his prints personally, and it's our boy." Margot waited until the men left the house before retreating herself. She needed to find Devon before those men realized he was still very much alive. They'd been tracking his phone, which explained how they'd ended up at his brother's apartment. It was only a matter of time before they found him. 11. Running through the small town invigorated Margot as she raced back to the bed and breakfast. The weight of the phone in her pocket was an ever-present reminder that if she didn't find Devon soon, they'd have another dead body on their hands. Kalina and Chris met her at the sidewalk as she skidded to a halt in the slush. "I know why Cecilia did it. She thought she was killing Devon. We have bigger problems, though. Devon's bookie is still looking for him," Margot announced, pulling the phone from her pocket. "I found this in Dennis's apartment. It's Devon's. I think Devon set up his brother to get killed. Goaded him into revealing where he was under the guise of reconciliation before Dennis deployed. His bookie was tracking his phone, and they showed up before I left. We did some research of our own. It turns out Officer Johns was friends with Devon back in high school," Kalina said. "He's been giving him breaks on charges for years. We don't have any hard evidence, but I'd say Johns is protecting Devon. It would explain why he lied to his partner about who it was we found this morning. If Devon is in deep with a bookie, then faking his death is a surefire way to get out of debt," Margot added. Chris's brow furrowed. "But he had to know they could find out he had a twin brother. I mean, even with limited resources, we figured it out." "The bookie isn't convinced, even though Johns is telling him the body is Devon. They're going to the morgue to check now." "So what do we do?" Kalina asked. "Find Devon before they do," Margot answered. "Any idea where he might go?" Chris interjected. "If he's trying to assume Dennis's life, I'd have to guess he'd try to see Cecilia one last time." "But she knows it's not Dennis," Kalina said. Margot's heart ached for the turmoil surrounding Cecilia. "I think she's a very confused young woman who is still trying to process what she's done," Margot replied, gesturing toward the door. "Now come on, we're wasting time." Officer Johns was nowhere to be seen when they arrived at the station, and that made Margot nervous. She couldn't decide if that meant he had gone to meet Devon's bookie at the morgue, or if he realized he'd been made and was trying to evade justice. Neither option instilled her with much confidence. Upon closer inspection, the station was oddly empty. There'd been at least a couple other officers on duty when Margot had come by to see Cecilia earlier. Where'd they all go? She didn't think her hunch about Devon's whereabouts was wrong, although maybe she'd misjudged the amount of influence he had over the small police force. "This seems too easy," Kalina whispered as they stood in the reception area. "It does feel off," Chris agreed. Chills ran down Margot's back that had nothing to do with the winter weather outside. "I don't disagree, but we need to hurry. If Devon knows his bookie is still looking for him, he may take even more drastic measures." She led Chris and Kalina to the holding area. Devon stood before Cecilia in Dennis's dress blues. The sight of him turned Margot's stomach, and her shoulders stiffened. How dare he dishonor what the uniform stands for? She could see Cecilia shaking under Devon's grip on her wrist. "Let her go!" Chris yelled, his hands moving to his belt, no doubt reaching for a gun no longer holstered there. Devon turned to face them, but he didn't let go of Cecilia's wrist. "Devon, I know you're scared right now, but hurting Cecilia isn't going to make things better," Margot said, closing the distance. "Stay back," he ordered, a handgun coming into view in his other hand. Margot stopped short and held her hands out where he could see them. "I'm not going to come any closer, but I will ask you to let go of her. She's going to jail for killing your brother. Isn't that enough punishment?" Devon relinquished his grip on Cecilia's arm. Immediately, she shuffled backward, curling up on the bench in the far corner of the cell. Devon turned. He held the gun loosely in his grip. "You're running. I think we can all see that. Can you tell us what happened?" Margot gestured to the two people behind her. "We all just want to understand how you got here. Can you help us?"
"He was always so much better than me. Better grades, better girlfriends, better ambitions. I didn't want to get pulled into this mess. It was supposed to be just a few bets, but it got out of control. I knew I could never pay it back, not in the time I had. I knew the only way I'd get out of it is if everyone thought I was dead."
"You weren't worried they'd go after your friends and family?" Kalina asked.
"He has a code. Your debt is yours, no one else's,"
Devon answered, shifting his weight back and forth, as if he couldn't decide the best direction to flee.
"So you were trying to get out of debt, so the logical progression was to murder your brother and assume his identity?"
Chris's tone carried a heavy dose of accusation. Devon pivoted back to Cecilia, who cowered in the corner.
"She wanted him instead of me. I could see it. So I thought maybe if I was him, things would be okay."
"You had to know people would investigate," Margot said calmly, hoping her demeanor and tone of voice would keep him from lashing out.
"I told Johns that he might be getting a call about a dead body. He promised that he'd respond and take care of it. We go back a ways. He's always looked out for me."
"So he was in on your plan to disappear under your brother's identity?" Devon nodded.
"It would have been perfect, too. I mean, people don't check fingerprints that often. I wouldn't even have to remember a new birthday or anything. I could be better than I was."
"I understand. But you have to know that you're going to jail for what you've done," Margot said. Devon's gaze flickered from the gun in his hand to Margot and her companions. His hand trembled as he started to lift it.
"You have to know if you pull that trigger, you aren't getting out of here alive," Chris said.
"Does he think Devon is going to shoot all of us to make his escape?"
"I know," Devon sighed,
turning the gun inward.
"But it's not like people don't already think I'm a dead man."
Margot saw what was about to happen, a desperate man about to end his own life, and lunged. Their bodies hit the floor with a thump, and she used her own weight to pin him down. His breath was hot against her face as she reached for the gun. Everything else fell away and slowed down, except her and the deadly weapon in his hand. Just a few more inches. Her fingers stretched out and finally found purchase on the muzzle of the gun. "No!" Kalina shouted, as Margot finally freed the gun from Devon's grasp. A shot rang out, deafening Margot's eardrums as she rolled off Devon. Panic sent her into overdrive. Her hands patted down her torso, but found no sign of injury. She turned to see Chris and Kalina standing side by side, their gazes turned upward. She followed their eyes to the ceiling, where a single bullet sat lodged in the paneling. She'd gotten lucky. Officers materialized as if out of thin air, Officer Vargas among them. Two of them approached Devon, hauling him to his feet.
"I heard everything. After our discussion at the house, I thought he might show up, so we let him think he had the upper hand," Officer Vargas explained, before turning to address Devon. "You are charged with conspiracy to commit murder and identity theft. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law," he said, administering the Miranda rights as they led Devon away.
"Please tell me you don't go charging men with guns often," Chris said, offering Margot a hand up. "Sadly, more often than you'd think." "Well, let's hope you don't have to do that again for a very long time." 12. By the following morning, news had broken about Devon's scheme, and how Devon had been aided by Officer Johns. Both were now in custody, and Margot had reached out to a lawyer friend who agreed to take Cecilia's case pro bono. Margot sat outside on the front porch of the B&B, enjoying the morning stillness. Kalina joined her, offering a mug of hot chocolate. "I think Caroline may have spiked it just a little," Kalina said with a small smirk. Margot returned the smile. "Everything in moderation, right?" She took a sip, tasting the tiniest hint of alcohol in the froth. Given what had transpired, she was grateful for the bit of numbness it provided. Kalina tucked her legs under her in the seat and looked at Margot. "You were really impressive yesterday, talking Devon down." "I've had practice and training. I went overseas to serve God, but that didn't mean I never had to defend myself or others while in the line of duty." She used her mug to gesture back to Kalina. "From the things you've said, it's not completely out of your realm of experience either." "I wanted to confront him," Kalina said, and her tone went breathy. "But it was like I was frozen in place. I saw the gun, and I immediately thought about my daughter. How, if I did or said the wrong thing, I could lose her." "That's the rational response. You put your child first. It's a biological imperative," Margot replied. "Not a godly one, though?" Kalina's slender brow arched upward. "Well, he made us, so I suppose, yes, it's his imperative, too." Margot's right hand brushed against the cross at her neck. "Thank you for seeing us all through another crisis." A peaceful silence fell between them. Kalina took a long pull from her mug, and after a moment, she spoke. "So, what will you do now that everything has died down?" "Go home. Share our crazy story with my cousin Sam. Pray that Cecilia will be given the fair trial she deserves, and that she can start to heal." "How do you heal from something like this?" Kalina asked. "With time and people to listen. Even if she serves time, I hope she's able to get some therapy, to build herself back up after everything Devon put her through." "I get the feeling she'll be able to do that. Besides, she's got you looking out for her." Margot smiled but said nothing. All she'd done was make a couple of phone calls. She wasn't a miracle worker. Now it was up to Cecilia to put in the work. "I hope Officer Johns gets what he deserves, too," Kalina said softly, a slight edge to her tone. Her comment reminded Margot of something Kalina had said the day before. She hadn't had time to follow up on it in the midst of chasing down Devon. "Yesterday, you said something about knowing that good people can do bad things for the right reason. It sounded personal." Kalina studied the contents of her mug. "The first case I worked with Chris was when we reconnected. The chief of police turned out to be the son of a man wrongfully convicted of murder. He was seeking revenge against the 3 witnesses who'd put his father in prison." "How awful!" Margot reached over and put a hand on Kalina's shoulder. "I can see how that would be upsetting." "It worked out then, and it's worked out now, too. The bad guys have been caught and justice done. Maybe now we can go home and not have to solve a murder for a while." That sounded lovely. Margot couldn't wait to get back to Port Marie and the normalcy of tending to her congregation. It's what she did best. As she reflected on her New Year's excitement, she realized that Devon and Dennis's story was as old as biblical tales. After all, Cain and Abel had been loving brothers once, turned against one another by emotions they perhaps didn't understand. Had Dennis felt responsible for his brother's bad actions? Devon's jealousy had certainly led him astray, and just like Cain, he would pay for his jealousy for the rest of his life. Margot could only hope that he would eventually see the error of his ways and work to make better choices in the future. This has been My Brother's Keeper, a Reverend Margot Quade cozy mystery novella, Book 4. Written by S.C. Biglow. Narrated by Stephanie Dillard. Copyright 2019 by Sarah Biglow. Production copyright 2022 by Sarah Biglow.